We are on page 144 in our math books, and we're going to talk about tipping. So most restaurant patrons add a tip to the final bill to show their appreciation for the waitstaff. Usually a patron will determine 15 to 20% of the bill and then add the amount to the total. Many times patrons will just round off the tip to the nearest dollar. So a patron is another word for a person who eats at a restaurant. So in other words, we're talking about the customer. Common benchmark percents that we use when calculating tips are 1%, 5%, 10%, and 25%. So let's look at this worked example. One strategy to determine a 20% tip for a restaurant bill that is $38.95 is to first determine 10% of the total and then double that amount. So if we're talking about 10%, we can change 10% to a decimal. And so that would be 0.1 or 0.10, however you want to write it. And then we're going to multiply it by $38.95. So you're going to want to go ahead and type that in your calculator. 0.1 times $38.95. And so you should get $3 and then 0.895. So if we're talking about money, that's roughly $3.90. Now when we're at a restaurant, typically we don't like to deal with all the change, so we would just round it up. So we would say it's about $4 for a 10% tip. A trick that you can use to calculate 10% is you take the decimal of the total, move it once to the left, and that's the same as calculating 10%. So you can see move it once and it would give you 3.895. You can round it appropriately. So then if we're talking about a 20% tip, that's going to be about $8 because we just double whatever the 10% tip was. Okay, so let's give it a little bit of practice. We're going to first start with the 20% tip, then we'll talk about the 15%. So before we do 20%, let's first figure out 10%. So if we're looking at our total, 10%, we would move it over once to the left. So that would be 8.945. So if we wanted to round, that would be about a $9 tip for 10%. So if we're talking about 20%, well, 10% just doubled. So that means 9 doubled. So that would be about $18. Well, now we want to figure out our 15% tip. Well, halfway between 10 and 20% is 15%. So let's first figure out what 5% would be. So 5% is half of 10%, so half of 9. Well, that would be $4.50. And then we know that 10% already was the $9. So if we're talking about calculating a 15% tip, we can add the two together. So that would be about $13.50. And that's how we can use our mental math to make tips, especially when you're sitting at a restaurant and you may not want to pull out your calculator. You can just move that decimal once to the left, figure out your 10%, and then double it to get to your 20, or you can half it and add it to get to your 15%. In America, you always want to make sure that you are properly tipping your waiters and waitresses. Okay, well now let's talk about what if we aren't actually estimating and we need to figure out something specific for our percent. We are going to use our percent equation. So this is on page 145. We can use a proportion to determine the amount of a tip based on the restaurant total. So we've been talking about setting up part over whole equals percent out of 100. In this case, the percent we're talking about is 15. Well, we can use this percent equation to also calculate however much our tip or the part is. This comes from the proportion, so it's just rearranged. So if we're solving for the tip, currently we're dividing by the whole or the total bill. Well, the inverse operation of division is multiplication. So I can multiply both sides by the whole. So over here on the left-hand side, I can see the whole cancels out with both. And we're left with the part equals, in this case, the percent, 15 over 100, times the whole. That is our general percent equation we can use. percent times whole gives us the part, or the tip. So in our example, 15%, that's the same as 15 over 100, or 0.15. And then we multiply it by the total bill, in this case, $45. So 0.15 times 45 gives us $6.75 for our tip. All right, flip your page over. Let's do a couple of examples. So we're going to use proportions and percents to solve and calculate our tips. So for a proportion, remember we set up part over whole equals our percent out of 100. So in this case, it gives us our bill. So is that the part, the whole, percent, or 100? That's the whole. So it's going to go into our denominator. And then we're going to set it equal to the percent. So in that case, it was 18 over 100. And we're trying to solve for the tip. So that's our unknown, so I'll call that x for the part. Well, from here, we know our method to solve is cross multiplication. So when I multiply across, I have 100x equals, and then the other direction, when I multiply, I do 18 times the $63.89. So now we have 100x equals, multiply those together, and we get 1,150.02. Last step, we isolate x, so we have to do the inverse operation. So we have to divide both sides by 100. So x equals 11.5002. Now, if we're talking about money, we would be rounding to the hundredths place. And so in this case, we'd be talking about a tip being $11.50. Well, now let's use our percent equation. So that percent equation goes percent times whole equals the part. So in this case, we know the percent is 18%. We need to change it to either our decimal or fraction first. So let's use the decimal. So 0.18 times our whole of $63.89. That is going to give us x, which is the tip that we're trying to solve for. So multiply 0.18 times 63.89. We will get x equals 11.5002. So we should get the same answer because it's two different methods of solving for the same thing. Whichever method you prefer is the one that you can ultimately use, but I wanted to prove to you that we would still get the same answer. So to answer in a complete sentence, the tip is $11.50. Now I want you to pause this video and go ahead and answer part B. All right, let's check to see how you did. So when you set it up, it was x over 24.4 equals 15 over 100. Cross multiply and solve. You get x is $3.66. For your percent equation, remember 15% is 0.15. So we plug it in, percent times whole, and we would also get $3.66. So the tip amount is $3.66. All right, flip your page over. We can continue to use our proportions and percents, but just solving for different unknowns. In this case, we're given the bill and the tip amount, so that means we're going to solve for the percent. So let's set up our proportion. So we know the tip is the part, so we have part over whole, so 15 over 80, and then equals, well, this time we're solving for the percent, so that's our unknown. So we have x over 100. And then we're going to cross multiply. So we have 80 times x, and then equals, going the other direction, 15 times 100. So we have 80x equals 1,500. We need to isolate x. So opposite of multiplication is division. So we have to divide both sides by 80. So x equals, we need to do 1,500 divided by 80, and we get 18.75. Well, now let's use our percent equation. So we have the percent times the whole. That equals the part. This time, we don't know the percent, so that's our variable. So I'm going to call that x. We do know the whole, so that's 80. And then equals the part, which was the tip amount of 15. Now this is not really in standard notation, so we would rewrite that as 80x equals 15. So then our last step, solve for x, divide both sides by 80. So x equals 0.1875. Now notice with our two answers, this first one is 18.75, the second one is 0.1875. With our percent equation, before we can ever plug that percent in, we always had to change it to the decimal first. So now since we have solved it, it gave us the decimal, we have to go backwards and change it to the percent. So our final sentence would be, the tip is 18.75% of the bill. All right, I want you to pause the video and do part B. Let's check to see how you did. So you set up your proportion, 10/80, part over whole equals, we don't know the percent, so x out of 100. Cross multiply and solve, so we get x is equal to 12.5. With your percent equation, you get x times 80 equals 10, and then we solve for x and we get 0.125. Remember, we'd have to change that decimal to the percent, so we move it 2 to the right. So the tip percent is 12.5%, or you can say the tip is 12.5% of the bill. All right, now we are on page 150. A room service server at a hotel receives an automatic gratuity that is proportional with the amount of the bill. Gratuity is just another word for tip. So gratuity and tip are the same thing. So it's what we've been talking about. We're going to suppose a room service server at the Sun and Sand Resort receives gratuity represented by the equation G equals 0.15B, where G represents the gratuity and B represents the food bill. So part A, what percent gratuity does the room service server receive and how do you know? Well, let's look at our equation. It gave us the decimal form of the percent. So that means our tip percent, or the gratuity, is 15% of the bill. Now we know this because the 0.15 is our coefficient, and when we're talking about that general equation, y equals k times x, that coefficient k represents the constant of proportionality. So 15% because 0.15 is the constant of proportionality. So 0.15 is the constant of proportionality. If the food bill is $19, how much gratuity did she receive? We're going to first start by writing the original equation. So G equals 0.15B. So $19, is that representing G or is it representing B? Let's talk about the food bill. So I'm going to plug in $19 for B. So I have G equals 0.15 times 19. So then we're going to type that in our calculator. So we get G equals 2.85. So the final answer, the gratuity, or remember that tip, the gratuity is $2.85. Now let's do part C. If the room service server receives a $2.10 gratuity, how much is the food bill? So we're going to do the same thing. G equals 0.15B. Now this time, the $2.10 is talking about the gratuity. So we're plugging that in for G. So we have $2.10 equals 0.15B. We want to isolate B, so the inverse operation of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide by 0.15. So B equals $2.10 divided by 0.15 will give us 14. So the bill is $14. Now you're going to flip the page over and you are going to complete page 151 and then pause the video to come back and check. All right, let's see how you did. So your equation, T equals 0.18B, so it was 18%. And then we're using T for tip, B for bill. The next one, we are plugging in $54 for the bill. So when we multiply, the tip is $9.72. The next one, it tells us the tip is $12, so we're plugging that in for T. And then we're solving for B, so we have to divide both sides by 0.18. So we get $66.67 for the bill. The next one, the bill is $12, so we plug it in for B, multiply, and we get the tip is $2.16. And then lastly, we know a tip of $3.20, so we plug it in for T, divide both sides by 0.18. So we get the bill is $17.78.